does. Okay, so well, good evening. It's 9:30 here, about 4:30 in Canada.
Yeah, in Ottawa anyway. Canada's
Ottawa.
got various time zones. But,
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Good stuff. And obviously, we were talking just a few months ago about tomorrow would have been the dude's 45th birthday. So I'm sure you'll wish him a happy birthday up in the big YouTube studio above, where he's going around telling everybody about all his the videos that he's done.
his legacy lives on for sure.
Yeah. And talking about YouTube channels, because his was the over 2 million views and over 7,000 subscribers. So
wow,
it was once described by Fresh Start Monday as Eric Ozzie was described once as the black belt of YouTubers.
Yeah, I remember when he started, and he went from zero to hero overnight, sort of thing.
Yeah. So talking about YouTube channels, Fleetside has his own YouTube channel as well, where you've got some pretty interesting videos. I watched one where you're asking for a ticket in 4 different booths, and all you're getting is a load of gobbledygook from the from the ticket seller. Yeah,
typical. Yeah, that one's on YouTube at if you surf on Fleetside's Well Is That Right, should bring you to that. And basically what that's about is we talked about the protocols last time.
Yes.
Using 6 key events through history and how society looks at those and the different perspectives. And chief amongst them is the notion that the official story is the weakest, least probable of all the options there. So it just goes to show. Anyway, that certainly that'll be an hour of people's lives they won't get back, but it will run you through the protocols. And as usual, love to take any thoughts or comments that people have, by all means.
Sure. No, it looked very, very slick and well made. So it's definitely worthy of going and checking out and enjoying and provoking thought.
Thanks for that. And I wasn't trying to develop a big YouTube channel, but yes, some points need to be made from time to time, and that's the goal.
To be honest, when I did my first video, it was going to be my one and only video, and it was simply the fact that I'd had these conversations with Herman. I wanted to disseminate some of the information. Putting it in a Facebook post was all well and good, but it soon got buried. Today's news is tomorrow's chip paper. And so therefore I thought, no, if I do a video, it'll always be there. And now I've done about 1,200 of the things. So,
is that right?
Yeah, and not all of them, of course, are to do with making a murder, or even, for want of a better word, crime and that genre. There's plenty of music videos. There's even one or two other bits that I've come across. If I've got something on my phone that I've taken a video of, or if there's something that's of interest, I'll just pop it on there. And
you're certainly a prolific producer now.
Well, it's just that sometimes it's a good way of networking, because you might get somebody who you didn't think for one moment was going to have an interest in making a murderer, but they tune into one of your music videos, and then they suddenly discover what's all this making a murder stuff. So you never know, you might end up with somebody that you least expected. I mean, I've got friends within the sort of accordion fraternity that are that do follow the case. and some of them, they don't even comment, so you don't even realize they're out there until you have a conversation with them, and they say, yeah, I've seen you doing your YouTube videos about Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey.
So they've been trolling you for the accordion, and then
Yeah.
collaterally kind of moved into the case. Yeah.
I actually heard about Dean and Jerry coming to Edinburgh the first time in 2018 purely through a pupil that told me that they were coming and knew that I followed the case. And again, I even got a message from one pupil to say, have you heard the latest news about Duffin awarding Brendan his writ of habeas corpus? And I remember taking the phone call and saying, wow, but that was somebody, just a pupil's mum that knew I followed the case and wanted to let me know.
Yeah, I bet that got the anxiety level going in some of the network there behind the scenes. That must have been a pressure moment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think if it hadn't been for Making a Murderer, then Duffin would have made his decision. The state wouldn't have argued it. They'd have just, fine, just let him go, But of course, Making a Murderer has really upped the ante, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's something that they can't seem to break away from.
Yeah.
And you had another video about movie actors that.
Yeah.
So is there thought of something coming up on Netflix that would follow, or?
Well, of course, first of all, we need to see Convicting a Murder, which is the Sean Reck documentary. And he assures me that I can have an interview with him before the end of the year, because before the end of the year is when the Convicting a Murderer will be released on whatever platform. We've also got Making a Murderer Series 3 to look forward to at some point. But I can't help thinking that, we've actually got the front row seats. So it's but yeah, what struck me about the fact that there was that article about the movie is that I remember within the first few months there was articles about Making a Murderer the movie, and Stephen Avery saying it'd be good if Brad Pitt used to play him. And then that article was from 5 days ago, so it's still it's Making a Murderer. Things can go quiet, because we're waiting on things, but it's like that duck swimming on the lake, all might seem very calm above water, but underneath the state are having kittens,
Oh yeah, behind the scenes would be pretty interesting. The machinations, the behind the locked door meetings that one would have to figure out how to navigate, how to keep this car on the road. So
the very much unminuted meetings that they're having.
No minutes.
No,
that is their style.
Yeah. Anyway, talking about documents, we've got your latest predilection.
Predilections. I'm trying to use dollar words here, the full dollar tool rather than cheap documents. This is expensive stuff. Exactly.
It's amazing how you come up with them so quickly. I mean, I'm allowed in saying that analyzing analytics is something that you do anyway. That is what you do. So it would be a little bit.
So all I'm doing is telling the thoughts that are happening in real time. It doesn't take much. There's no creation to it. It's rightly or wrongly, this is the way I see the world. But I think, like truthers, the idea is to be a critical thinker, and we're trying to figure out what makes a truther tick. Why are truthers a little different? And the idea of being a critical thinker, that's a vital element of any sound society, to be critically thinking your institutions, to holding them to account, to keeping them in check for what would otherwise be a sort of power grab. And as we talked in one of the earlier ones, I think the power grab is very much in play currently. In fact, that other video that we talked about, Fleetside's Well Is That Right? on YouTube that
Yeah.
that gets into that exactly and relates it, current events to past events, and just causes you sort of stretch the critical thinking envelope a little bit.
Sure. Okay. So if you'd like to give us
Okay,
a
so
quick
I'll,
blast through- yeah, if you do,
We
please.
sort of pre-agreed that I would try to read these
Yeah,
treacherous
please do, yeah.
words. Okay, so reaching back to our original podcast on the various alternative explanations of what went on, wherein we set out the 7 alternative whodunit hypotheses of the day. The framework below provides my own predilections on ongoing discussions. Amidst extensive uncertainty, it provides a structured approach to what I think most probably transpired in 2005.
Sure.
However, perhaps more pragmatically, it illuminates my biases in review of the material and research of others. So this, in other words, will tell you what is in my head. Not everything that is in my head, but just the important stuff on, in other words, where I'm sort of pre-positioned on the case, and what would therefore interest me, what I would favor in terms of research, and what I would find perhaps discounting, and again, that's rightly or wrongly. The intent in sharing this is to see if there's a common position amongst truthers, pondering the question, what truly transpired. Through this, a key takeaway is the premise: the official Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey narratives is amongst the most improbable of the explanations. So as we did, and I think that was probably a year ago, I can't recall when we did the original, you and I got together and we went through the various possibilities. We'll get into the diagram there that's about to come up. But, so these would be the sum total of the mutually exclusive alternatives of what went on. And again, as I think we said at that time, if anybody's got another theory or another logic that isn't consistent with this, by all means, that'd be good feedback to hear. So we can, we're always, I think, as you said from the outset, we're always willing to be proven wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, but I would have said more than 12 months, possibly 24 months, because
oh, really?
Yeah, because I mean, you had short hair back then.
Yeah. I'd have to look at the data. Maybe it was.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. It would probably been 2 years ago. Yeah. See, I'm older than I thought.
You're more gnarly.
I'm more gnarly by the day. In our earlier presentation, we had reviewed the diagram below that attempted to present the panacea of mutually exclusive alternative explanations. So if we pop up the diagram, this is nothing fancy, but this is like a decision logic with Ms. Hallback at the top, and the various truthers out there have looked at theories that span the panacea. So some have her as having died in 2005. Some have her as alive. If you follow down the notion that she died, some would suggest it was a murder. Others had suggested there was an accident. Others had suggested suicide. If you get into the murder side, then there's a question: was it Stephen Avery? Some have suggested the county law enforcement could have been involved. Some have suggested Peg Lautenschlager and company. And what did you call her? Leixelager?
Peg Leixelager, yep.
Yeah, and or someone else, right? And then if you get into that someone else, we have various protagonists. The most popular are Brendan Dassey, Ryan Hill, Bobby Dassey. Yeah, I trigger that right. Bobby Dassey, yeah.
Bobby Dassey, Scott Taddick, and also Mike Osmondson are all very, very suspicious, aren't they?
Yeah, so I didn't put Mike in there, but I had, and I can't recall back at the day whether that was a prominent theory, but we had Bobby Dassey, Ryan Hill, I guess, Scott Taddick, the German Wayne Edwards, and other, so again, rightly or wrongly, but what's interesting is only one of these can be right. And so what I'm trying to do here is unpack how I come at it as a matter of logic. Again, with the spirit of trying to be proven wrong. So in the current presentation, I would like to identify the various decision gates and their associated implications to provide an analytically structured approach to logical deduction. Of course, as we don't have access to required transparency, I may be treading into no man's land here. So part of the challenge, as any truther, anybody investigating what went on, is we're fighting for transparency, and the state is fighting against transparency. So you're caused to get into logical conjecture without full information. As information comes along, then that causes you to learn and perhaps refocus. But key in that is to make sure that we're not waiting for perfect information before we critically think this thing. So I think the most dangerous mindset would be unless and until I have perfect information, I won't engage. I think we have to use reasonable logic and conjecture. So I reduced this to an attempted mathematical schematic. I assumed a magnifier of significance that differentiates between low impact, medium impact, and high impact using the weightings 1, 2, and 4 respectively to make a nonlinear accelerated scale. So in other words, I'm trying to make this rather mechanical.
Sure.
And we can visit each of those gates. We can look at the factors that I haven't considered in my head. And then I put against each of those factors whether that helps the argument or hinders. And then I put a weighting against that. And I have an accelerated scale. So in other words, a minor point, a low impact point, I provide that a value 1. And then a medium, I provide twice that as a 2. And then something that's high impact, I have as a 4. So that's like a exponential curve. Yeah. There are 4 tables below that address each of the key decision gates. So the first gate is in the first table, factors considered in the hypothesis of a death in 2006. Then we get into the other gates. So gate 1 considers the hypothesis of a death in 2006 versus the alternative. And so that's the diagram down.
You want me to take that down?
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, you're saying 2006, but
yes,
2005.
Yeah. Right. So my apologies. And I've been, I think in previous podcast, I used 2006, and I was looking it up again. So there again, I'm out a year, right? So something happened in my space-time continuum. I lost a year in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that should read 2005. Absolutely. So, so this is our diagram, and this is the decision gate. Now, for me, unlike perhaps the average truther, I shift to the right on that. Mm-hmm. My tendency is to look at the alive theories and less so the dead, and I'll explain why that is. That's the whole nature of the exercise. But we'll keep, notwithstanding that gate, we'll keep burrowing down. So I've listed the factors considered. That's in the, that you had it there. That's the table. I'll just read the, I've listed the factors considered, whether in my estimation they were an attractor, green, or a detractor, red, in the consideration and the magnifier. So these are basically down the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And trying to think if there's 10 in there. So the color thing is simply whether that is in favor of the argument or red is against the argument. The magnifier is whether it's a minor consideration, a medium consideration, or a major consideration. And then the points to reflect that, to bring it back to mathematics, are the 1, 2, or 4. So obviously, when I'm looking at that first gate, I look at the firstly the impracticality in keeping it a secret. Mm-hmm. So the notion that she could have survived past 2005 in a way that is not consistent with the mainstream story. So the first factor to hoist aboard is that would be incredibly difficult to the number of people that have been on it to keep that a secret. And if somebody ever showed up or there ever a sighting, then all of a sudden there's hell to pay, right? So to me that's a high consideration. I have that as an H and a +4 in it. So that's in favor of the argument that she died in 2005. So then parsimony we talked about before, the idea of making the argument as simple as possible, which I also have as a high consideration. And if you think of how many parameters one would have to reach in and manage and manipulate to enable that, that's an extensive reason to not favor that theory. As a third point, I've also considered that the courts have ratified, so this is consistent with where the courts went and also the appeal courts. And in the case of Brendan Dassey, the Supreme Court as well. So it's a consideration. I have that as a low, so that's a consideration in favor of death, but I have that as a low consideration because I'm not really fond of the courts. I don't put a whole lot of, I see a lot of politics in what should be, for analytic purposes, you're trying to look at objective inquiry.
Yeah.
So then the fourth one, which is against the argument, is the lack of DNA confirmation. And to me, this is, I put that as a medium, and I would almost err on the side of something a little higher. But the fact that we have a lot of work being done to avoid a declaration of the DNA and confirmation of the DNA. Mm-hmm. So the lack of confirmation to me is a point worth considering, how that is a medium, and that's against the notion of death. Item 5, structured obfuscation of the DNA evidence. And this is where we look at the antics of those in care and custody of the evidence, and the courts that oversaw these antics and let this go on. I find that to be an absolutely incredible point. It makes you want to really reach in and study that a little more carefully. What are they hiding behind there? But they have taken extraordinary measures to avoid offering up anything that would have DNA for some reason. So I put that as a high, and that's against the death. Now, the lack of family reaction, that's a controversial one, and we have to realize the sensitivity to the family. This is a very sensitive and touchy area. For the sake of analysis, we make it fairly black and white, but this is a tricky point. Now, some people have argued that different families grieve differently, and not to read too much into the perhaps lack of reaction, where Mike Holbach, for example, suggests that they could be in mourning for days or whatever. Yes. It wouldn't be intuitive to me that that's what you would expect as a response, or if you look at as some have caught on video, the others in the family and their reaction or lack thereof. But again, that's a very touchy area. Now, so I put that in as a factor. Yep. I have that diminished to a low and a -1, giving the sort of benefit of the doubt. Yeah. The seventh item there, availability of alternative DNA hosts. Now, what's fascinating to me, I have this as a high, but you had Christine Rudy at the time. You also had Carmen Bootwell, and Teresa Holbach, all at the same time, and in rough proximity. And then you also had them handled at the same crime labs by the same people, with the chain of custody that was nested within a limited few. And I just find that to be a very strange paradise. So I have that one in there at the at high. So that's 4 against. Prepositioned and timely estate planning. So one has to factor in how on earth did they have the foresight to plan the estate? How much before the event was that? I can't recall, but I think it was within months, if not weeks. So you get into estate planning, wills, that sort of thing, insurance potentially. So I have that as a high and a detractor as well, -4. Now, the RAV obfuscation is very bizarre because that should be a fairly straightforward matter. What's wrong with looking at the RAV? And I suspect one of the problems with looking at the RAV is it would have DNA in it. And so, which brings you back to that earlier argument. But this whole RAV circus and the idea, I know people are tired of hearing the color issue, so we won't delve too far into that. But the idea that it was referred to as green in all circumstances up until the day after which it was blue, and Mr. Kratz went as far as to say green and/or blue. So it was very clearly green at all times before, and unclearly blue during the trial and blue thereafter. So the whole RAV thing is high and a -4. And now post benefits to family members. This is the age-old, the Latin cui bono, who benefits, who benefited from this. And we see some truthers have raised the benefits that certain family members achieved. Now, to me, I don't make a whole lot of that. It's an interesting point. I have that as a low, as a -1. Others may think differently. But anyway, the summation of all that puts me in at a sort of -11 on the death, which means I favor the alive theory at that point. And so the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, and while recognizing the obvious challenge in this, I mean, how ridiculous is it to suggest that someone would be alive after that and that they'd be able to keep a lid on that. But notwithstanding that, the alternatives are worse. So based on the information available, I'm considerably more inclined to research arguments on theories indicating she was alive post 2005. So again, my error there, than dead. I could be persuaded alternatively, but only if I could confirm the status of the factors accordingly. So if new information comes to light that sheds a perspective on those, then by all means you revisit that. I'm otherwise impervious to emotional banter. So quite often what happens is there's a lot of, oh, come on guys, to stop thinking that way, start thinking over there. That's like water off the duck's back for me, so to speak. But go ahead and give it a try. So anyway, supplemental considerations in that sort of context. The official posture may have been hatched quickly without complete consideration of the implications. So what, if there was an alive theory, it may have been hastily put together. They had to desperately get off those depositions, which was achieved within minutes, hours, minutes. It was right down to the wire, and obviously in the bigger picture to defeat the lawsuit. If there were a plan, the one we are reviewing could be their plan B. It would be interesting to try try shifting the context to see if a pattern forms for any prospective plan A. So for example, Cuss Road, something went on there that we're unclear of, something of significant proportion, that could include the burning of a RAV or similar, or a body or something. So Cuss Road is a bit of a wild card, and there are other wild cards, but what we may be seeing is may not have been their first choice. Beyond the central manipulators, many in Manitowoc and Calumet would be simply doing their jobs within what became a poisoned well. So the suggestion there is many well-intending players, both at in Manitowoc and at Calumet, would be just doing their job, and they're sort of drafted into submission along the way. So they wouldn't have to be in on it or anything.
But just don't ask any questions.
Pardon me?
But just don't ask any questions, People would know not to ask any, any tricky questions of people higher up the food chain, because you would be quickly associated as being not
not on the right side of the protocol.
Yes.
But
exactly.
so again, my inclination would be to study the alive theories and investigate further the possibility of any of those. So gate 2, if we set that aside for a moment, we say, okay, let's presume there was a death. Factors to consider to determine whether death was a murder, accident, or a suicide. So that's that sort of next couple of gates all piled into one. So my factors, I've only got 4 in there. So for murdered, and you're starting at a -11. So this is a very, again, that reflects the reality that I'm not in favor of this. But the murder would be aligned with the official narrative. So there's something to be said for that, a modicum of something. I have that as low, and one in favor of the murder, but 1 point. The timing is absolutely incredible, and I have that as high and as a detractor. The coincidence in the depositions is absolutely astounding. That the notion that Stephen Avery would have a weak moment and would step out and do this right in time to assure the fortunes of the 2 key players that would have control over the crime scene and what advanced. So I have that as the sum total of that is a -14. The idea that she was murdered. Now the accident. So that to me is also a question of probability. Same with the suicide. Each of those I have as high -4s. The same thing could be said. What are the chances that that she would have an accident right at that time? What are the chances that she would suicide right at the time? Timing is absolutely phenomenal. So I'm not inclined to jump on that bandwagon. So in conclusion, I'm predisposed to eliminating coincidental death from the debate, and I'm slightly inclined to support the murder theory over accident or suicide, keeping in mind that I don't buy the murder theory. So then supplemental considerations. Relative DNA victims were available at the time under circumstances similar to the official narrative. So both Carmen Bootwell after the cremation and Christine Rudy, her assailant, I think it was her husband, wasn't it? So there was burnt DNA available again in the crime lab at the same time. Alternative DNA victims coincidentally handled by the same limited officials under the carefully controlled chain of custody. So it's just phenomenal that all these elements would come together in that way to carefully manage, while coincidentally you have these other 2 DNA samples available on the very point where DNA is, to me, less than confirmed. So that starts to form a striking pattern. DNA testing consumed or compromised, when Sherry Colhane accidentally sneezed on the samples or whatever happened there. Whoopsie, we destroyed or we consumed in our testing the total material available. And then the fact that, points 1, 2, and 3 are compounding. They're sort of coincidences within coincidences, which is a striking point. It's hard to get past. So then table 3, factors considered to determine the potential of an alternative murderer. So this is the question of Stephen Avery versus the county versus Peg Lawton, Slaughter and Company, or someone else, one of the protagonists. I've sort of got them for this table, and then I bunch those together, and then I go down to the next table to break those out. So for Stephen Avery, in favor of the state's position, I would give that a 1-pointer. It's low, but aligned with the official narrative, sure. The timing question of a remote probability, I don't buy into that. So that's a high -4. Key for me is item 3. So certainly as an engineer, I try my best to stick within the limits of science and try not to reach into pseudoscience and other things, but the notion that within the space-time continuum as we know it, you could destroy a body in the time frame and under the conditions there, the energy equations don't work. This is like that Oswald moment with Kennedy. You in the magic bullet theory, you either change physics that day and lend yourself to that, which has you second guessing some of the most fundamental and foundational components of your logic, or there's something wrong with the story. So I have that as high, -4, and I've been disciplined not to go beyond, but I would really add -4 should be probably -16. And then the lack of family reaction. Even if it were Stephen Avery or anyone else, I think the family would be distraught and destroyed. So I'm still unclear. Maybe I'm misreading that, but I put that as a low detractor. That's 1. So I'm at -22 on the Steve thing. So in other words, that's a grotesque, in terms of conjecture, that's a minimal consideration in my mind. That's far from reality. The second one is the county law enforcement. Now, this is where I would say it's very hard to imagine law officers engaged in murder. I can't, I have a hard time personally fathoming how that could be possible. So I put that, that's a high consideration. That's a -4 against the notion that county would actually murder someone. It could happen, and then lack of family reaction there as well. So similarly, if the county had done it, the family would still be destroyed. Doesn't matter who. So this one brings me to a -19. So in other words, that's a repulsive option for me, but it's slightly better than the more repulsive option with Stephen Avery. So similar, if you go down and you look at Peg Lautenschlager and company, Leixelager.
Yeah.
Similarly, I would find that very challenging in everything I understand of her, and which is not much, but someone in that station. Very hard to imagine. I would consider that a high. I've got that at a -4 as well, the family reaction. And similarly with the, we'll finish that one off. So that's a -19.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I go down to the other protagonists, any one of the potential, so items 7 and 8. So at least I would, there's something there that's important for me. This is aligned with truth or theory, so I would give that a +4. That's a pretty high consideration. There's a lot of sleuthing that's been done, a lot of good people that hold that view, so that has some suasion for me. But you still have the lack of the family reaction. So if it was Bobby Dassey or Ryan Hilligus, or who else has Scott Tash, Edward Wayne Edwards, whoever could have done it, I would think the family would be quite destroyed over that. So anyway, I've got that as a -11. So that's not good, but it's better than the other 3. So the conclusion for me on that one is I'm not inclined to consider other murderers as probable replacements for Avery. Now, then we get into the meat and the sandwich on the whodunit, and if we blow past all that and we say, okay, let's take for granted that one of the following people did it. This is the murder mystery whodunit. For gate 3 table, is that gate 3 table 4. Factors considered in determining if there is an alternative murderer, who that would be. So that's our list. The circle in the diagram below is our list of possibilities. And then if we, should be gate 4, table 4, I should have said it. Anyway, so this is where, if I look at Bobby versus Ryan versus Scott versus the German, and I didn't include Edward Wayne Edwards, but one could do that. Who else don't I have in there? Mike Ormson, as you had mentioned. So they could rightfully be added. I think I've pandered to the traditional, options. But to me, so Bobby Dassey, certainly there were the scratches,
Yep.
which is a telltale sign. That's a high. That's a very strange coincidence. The porn and to me, I've got that as also interesting, but of lower import than say the scratches.
Mhm.
And I must say, it wasn't just porn. It was sort of the substance. I think Kathleen Zellner was trying to paint the picture that it related to the nature of the material in the mainstream saga. So anyway, I did put something in for that, and so you go from -11 at the entry point to
Mhm.
-6. Now, Ryan Hilligus, certainly as the X, always raises the ire of investigators, should have in this case. And unfortunately, that's sort of a full stop. That's just a statistical point without any reflection further on Ryan, just as the status of the X, you'd want to look at that. I've got that as a low, but a 1. And then engagement in the investigation, his
Mhm.
deep and sort of always in there at the right time. Very odd situation, but I have put 2 points there, sort of a moderate. So in other words, I would say I've got Bobby at -6. I've got Ryan at -8. So I would favor Bobby over, say, Ryan.
Yeah.
And then Scott Tadish, the temper, the actions at the smelter. There were a few other things, but basically, yeah. So I have those as low considerations, relatively speaking. I know some people put a lot of weight into those.
Mhm.
And so that's a -9. The German, one thing that's fascinating there was the attack on his wife. If I got that right, I think there was some attack on his wife.
There was a lot of strange stuff about him, wasn't there?
Yeah. So I have that as quite a high one, +4. So the conclusion for me, out of the 3 listed alternative prospective murders, I would favor Bobby Dassey over the German, over Ryan, over Scott Tadish, in that order. Now, what would be interesting is any truther can similarly look at the table and change the considerations, change the weightings, but it's an interesting way to unpack your own thinking and logic, and why did I come to this conclusion? Why do I feel this way? Am I just am I double counting certain things? Am I understating certain considerations? And it sort of forces a discipline. And in the end, as I say, if somehow someday we find out that this was right, then more power to me. But someday we may find it is not right, in which case this simply unmasks my bias in looking at things.
Sure.
So now the protocols. I was going to touch on the protocols, and again, for the protocol discussion, that YouTube video, Fleetside's, well, is that right? I'll get into the protocols there. So that one's not related to the Stephen Avery case, but I get into in that one the Kennedy assassination, the Gulf of Tonkin, 9/11, climate change, ISIS, and COVID. So anyway, on the protocols front, we talked about this last time, and the basic issue of the protocols is how large a lens do I investigate within? Am I in a very tight bubble of the official story, or am I looking in a slightly larger theater at players where there could be a conspiracy at the local level, or do I look even larger where there could be a conspiracy of higher ups and so on and so forth? So protocol 1 would be Steve and Brendan killed Teresa Halbach twice, as set out in the state's official narrative. So you have to be able to hoist that aboard, but that is the official narrative. Both were declared correct, and both are different. So anyway, Protocol 2, this is where Dave Bagoda had done a lot of, discussion about the club and orchestrated events to have Steve put away, and the larger institutions are being simply drafted into submission. So I would suggest the larger institutions are committing a malfeasance, but the point at Protocol 2 is that who instigated, who did it. And so Protocol 2 would suggest, the club orchestrated this. Now, Protocol 3 would suggest Peg Leixelager did this. See, I'm using your terminology there, Paul.
Yeah, she got done for drink driving, didn't she?
Yeah.
So even though she was the Attorney General. It's
funny how, that was an unfortunate. Anyway, won't go too far off script there.
Okay.
So Peg Leixelager. So the theory here. So again, protocols don't say something's right or wrong. It just simply means, where are you limiting your horizon of vision? It's intuitive for society to usually stick to Protocol 1, and that's it. And so at Protocol 3, this would suggest that Peg had mobilized the club to shape events and that enabled the incarcerations. And she would also have the tentacles of influence to be able to reach in some respect to influence to a certain degree the larger institutions that have worked to make this whole making a murderer saga work. And Protocol 4 would go even further. So the notion that there's something higher than Peg, maybe senior level Masons that are mobilizing Peg to use the club, so it's just a larger bubble. So those are the 4 protocols. So then the questions down below, my field of consideration is based on the following questions. Which of the protocols are we using as our lens for investigation 1, 2, 3, or 4? And I think in the truther community, if you grab any particular truther, they're in one of those 4. And I would say primordially they're toward the 1, maybe 2. So on that first question, I'm simply saying, what lens do I use? I use a level 4. That simply means that I'm open to consideration and discussion on any of those levels. But then the second question is more poignant. Which of the protocols appears to operate? So I would suggest it seems to me, given that I would favor an alive theory, that requires a considerable orchestration. So consistent with that, I would have Peg Leixelager in there as the mastermind, and then I would want to understand what were her political ambitions and objectives, and any tactical connections with others. What was making her tick at the time that could relate to this case? In other words, what was the danger if Steve had gone on to sue and win and not to be reincarcerated? What knitting would that undo for PL? And that would be
huge damage, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that's where I would gravitate as sort of first instance, kind of try to understand, try to climb into her head to see what's going on at the time. And then the third one, under the scenario, what role did the various parties play? And that's where the last table, what I've done, if you're able to scroll down.
I was just going to mention, of course, that the Attorney General, part of their job description is to try and help the state budget. That is part of their job, isn't it?
Right.
To try and save the state as much money as possible.
Yeah, and that goes to so there's a conflict of interest obviously inherent in that. Yep. So if that operated, and it could be, let's say it was just that would be sort of a Protocol 2 position. Yep. Where the district attorney out of political ambition tried to save money and sort of look the other way on a few things. That's entirely possible, but it's a conflict of interest, and those are political positions. Mm-hmm. Where you live and where I live, we don't, those are not elected positions, those are appointed, but in the US, it's a bit of a different situation there. So what I've done in this table is simply put the various players out there that we've talked about in the past. Evers government, we've got the Attorney General, Peg Lotschlager, we've got the club, we've got the mainstream media, we've got the Circuit Court, the Appeal Court, the Supreme Court, we've got the various players, Bobby Dassey, Ryan Hilge, Scott Tadge. So in my sense, given that I think that Protocol 3 operated, that this went up to the to Peg Lotschlager, then I think in that context, Evers is doing little more than is following the protocol that that he thinks he's doing the right thing following. So he's sort of induced. Each of these is a tremendous malfeasance in my view, given that we hold the view that the corruption caused something, or that someone other than Steve, Steve is unjustly incarcerated here, and Brendan. So Evers, I would suggest, played a more incidental role, sort of induced into what the others had done. So Peg Lotschlager, therefore, in my theory, so as a Protocol 3, she instigated, and also the club would have operated to play some of the parameters to influence, between Calumet and Manitowoc, and between the DAs and the various players at the court level, perhaps. So they'd be your instigators. The mainstream media is sort of induced into submission here too. They're following. I don't think they're following journalistic instinct, but I think what they're doing is following the societal protocol. They're afraid to make the wrong argument, an unpopular argument. And so that's a minor faux pas. The circuit court, I think the circuit, I mean, my own sense of it is the circuit court is aiding and abetting the destruction of evidence and the rest of that stuff. I have a hard time reaching outside and seeing how the circuit court is truly being a court. Now, the appeal court, it could be something different. So they're sort of induced into a submission, perhaps by, again, not wanting to make the unpopular call, but not suggesting this would be of their doing. The Supreme Court, similarly, I'm amazed that Brendan's case went all that way, and lo and behold, and it's be interesting to see the stats on how often that happens, but the judges ever so slightly decide to turn against taking any action. Now, if you look at, so for me, Bobby Dassey, I look at him as aiding and abetting. So the question for me would be, did he perjure himself? Did he reach outside unnaturally to help Uncle Steve get locked away? That's where my mind would go, as opposed to the leftmost column where he was a murderer in lieu of Steve. Now, Ryan Hilge, same thing. Scott Taddish, same thing. So I look at them as each having played a significant role in the injustice of making a murderer, but not so much in the being the murderer sort of thing. So I would be inclined to explore all Ive theories and the notion that Pagel instigated the events in, again, 2005. At least I'm consistent.
Yes.
And I would allow for alternative explanation as further transparency warrants. Under this theory, the DNA used to frame Stephen Avery was that of one of the other two victims. That would be my, I would want to have a confirmed and firm read of Teresa's DNA. I would want to have Christine Rudy's DNA, and I would like to have Carmen Bootwell's DNA, just as reference. I would like to have the RAV and check that DNA.
Yes.
Now, for me, the very apparent circuit court manipulation, and those are the various other protagonists, Bobby, Ryan, Scott, appears to be limited to after the fact activity that has enabled framing and the maintaining of a murderer. Evers, the mainstream media, the appeal court, and the Supreme Court appear to have played the more incidental role, being induced into submission, supporting the cause out of solidarity and concern for implications of undoing the making of a murderer. So all these other institutions that are sort of drafted into submission, I think are predisposed to consider what are the implications if they let this unravel, and which is not good for truth, not good for justice, but nonetheless is the part of the difficult choices they have to make. If we could substantiate and not simply persuade that the death occurred, or if we could demonstrate that Protocol 3 does not apply, the alive theory would become less plausible, returning us to staring into the abyss under those smaller theories. And so in other words, if I could learn more in those two areas, and they weren't, and it wasn't sort of a confirming learning, then yeah, I would adjust operating hypothesis and go a different way. So for me, the DNA, reputable confirmation of exemplar DNA, reputable correlation with any Stephen Avery burn pit DNA, reputable chain of custody, reputable testing. So in other words, we would know precisely whose DNA was where and what that meant. And reputable confirmation of that RAV history and identity remain the keys to Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey's futures. Recommend continuing to lean on those uncertainties. I know, so Millbilly, for example, is bird dogging the RAV. Others are trying to persuade him not to. I think he's right on the money. I would keep, keep the pedal to the metal on that one.
Yeah.
So recommend continuing to lean on those uncertainties. I remain open to support or challenge as others see fit. Perhaps this framework or similar can be considered to support alternative points of view, keeping in mind diversity of thought is an essential ingredient of objective inquiry. And on that point, I'm simply suggesting we shouldn't all be thinking alike. It can be distressing to see like a herd of cats, we're all, if we were all going in different directions. I think we are sort of corralled into basic camps, and some of us may not, and including myself, may not have understood why I had a certain orientation a certain way, and that was the intent of this presentation. Other truthers could certainly do something similar, and it doesn't have to be as formal, but just to jot down what are the considerations at each of those gates. Are those the mutually exclusive alternatives? Do you have others? And then sort of dissect it to make sure that we're within the total context, making the optimal call on what we really think happened that day. In the end, the real hope is with Kathleen Zellner getting that evidentiary hearing and access to evidence. As I had mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts, I don't personally hold out hopes there if history is the guide, and so I think the truther community has a much stronger and more important role, notwithstanding the court procedure, but we certainly wish her well and hope for the best.
Yeah, I've written down a couple of things to, just as I say, struck me. Something I've always thought about was, imagine in 2003 being Stephen Avery, who spent 18 years in prison, and the sheriff's department, thinking we've sorted this guy out. We had a little bit of a hiccup when that Gregory Allen phone call came through, but not to worry, we covered that over.
Yeah.
And then the threat to Thomas Kasurik by actually naming him personally in the civil suit. So he's panicking. He's checking apparently six different insurances that he's got in order to see if he's covered. And I can't help thinking that had it just been the district attorney's office, had it simply been the sheriff's department, things might have been different. But the fact that they were being named.
Yeah, and I would assume on the insurance front, insurance would not cover you for intentional acts.
Yes.
That would null and void the policy, but you would, and I think that was a very sensitive issue for him. So he's conflicted.
Mhm.
He and his, and that means the whole network there is conflicted.
Yeah. So, you know, is it almost a case of, you know, Steve was a bit naive to have carried on staying so openly in Manitowoc County when he's got this civil suit going on,
Yeah, I
where
think,
he's named the sheriff?
yeah, and that's his life. You know, that's all he's ever known, hasn't it?
Yeah.
He grew up there, and so the thought is, if he could somehow disappear,
Yeah.
or the alternative is, if rather than suing, you know, why let sleeping dogs lie, and try to go back into society without leaning on those sleeping dogs too much. But I suspect that would have been they would have got him again. So I'm not sure that any of those are good. You know, I think the key issue is, yeah, the key players for the state were in a conflict of interest, and in a huge way. That was a lot of money. And you know, people say, well, the 36 million wasn't going to be 36 million; it would be discounted. By the time you know, he sees the money, it might have been 4 million. Well, that's enough.
Yeah.
You know? And not just money, but so this is why so as ridiculous as it sounds that she could have been alive after, as I've argued that the alternatives are even more ridiculous. So you're trying to take the least offensive of the various arguments, but I just can't imagine. You know, if that had gone on, what it is that would have unraveled for Peg Launchlager, and the fact that her son's in there currently is a very strange. You know, these homebrewed. I just. It's a very strange circumstance there, but what is it that would cause somebody to reach out? Because she could have been entangled in real issues. You know, that's quite a big step. She would have to be undergirded by a network of sorts that would help her, whether that's political, you know, the party. Hard to say. But something, that's what I would like to put my finger on. What on earth, had that proceeded, what was about to happen, and had that what would cause Peg to reach in and help the situation along.
Yep. A couple of little points. I remember watching. You know, you talked about the defies physics. I remember when I watched it the first time, saying to myself, "There's no way you can cremate to that extent in a bonfire for 3 hours." You know, it's just ridiculous. You know, that those bones are being subjected to a very, very hot flame.
So a crematorium, the temperatures are miles above what you could ever hope to do. It doesn't matter how many tires you throw on the fire. That's not going to be sufficient hot flame. No. And that doesn't even talk about the people around that didn't notice anything. I mean, that's a whole other dimension. But just in terms of the physics, no.
But yeah, just one little point, final point. You know, the fact that Kenneth Peterson talks about the Manitowoc County Assassination Unit. You know, and as horrible as it might seem, it could be that, you know, the sheriff's department have such a low opinion of other human life that in order to save, you know, or in this case, Tom Kasurik, in order to save his own embarrassment and what was potentially going to be happening, you know, was it a case of there was a, you know, yes, take care of this, do whatever you have to do to take care of it, and if it means sacrificing a 25-year-old photographer, I'm like you. I accept that there's going to be a whole different range of possibilities, and I get the fact that you're looking at it from the point of view, you know, when you know, rather than take your own sort of emotion and your hunch, rather than doing it that way, there's a way of sort of
structure.
looking at it, yes.
But I'd be inclined, let's say you wanted to light up that theory. And so, yes, I have a hard time imagining that there would be a hit squad per se. I don't have a whole lot of trouble with the notion that the club could be
Yes.
doing something.
Yeah.
But for law enforcement, so again, rightly or wrongly, I have a hard time with that. But the thread I would tug on there is Carmen Bootwell. I would want to know a little bit more about what happened. Was she sacrificed?
Yeah.
So it may not be. Carmen Bootwell was I think they put it down to a drug overdose, didn't they?
Methadone, yeah.
Yeah, and so entirely possible, but some strange hanky-panky in there that had law enforcement involved as well. And so is there a variant on what you said? Is it possible that she was taken out or induced into something, and that still leaves, and then the DNA is available to paint a certain picture? Very hard to say. Each of these are so fantastically ridiculous. But that's what's intriguing about Making a Murderer. The most ridiculous of them all is the Stephen Avery Brendan Dassey narrative.
Yeah.
And the rest of them are all bad.
Yeah.
But are just marginally better.
Yes. It's a case of working backwards from the least probable.
Yeah.
And the most impossible. Again, going back to the fact that there was no expert testified about the bonfire, and I noticed you commented on my video about an unreasonable degree of scientific uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, that was brilliant. So that's a good thing to hang your hat on. This notion of what was the exact wording? Reasonable scientific standard.
Well, yeah, to a reasonable, the official line is to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. But for me, the question is, well, how do you measure the degrees of scientific certainty?
Right. So science, and so that brings us back to more current events. You'll notice that a lot is being justified in the name of science.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing on the face of the planet right now is politicians that sit and say, listen, I have to follow the voices of science. And meanwhile, the voices of science are spouting politics.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the same thing happening there, where you're using voices of science and this idea within reasonable scientific certainty. The minute you shut down options and go with and take on faith a theory, you're no longer science. So scientists are crazy people. They are perpetually trying to prove themselves wrong and investigating. It's not for the faint of heart, but there's a reason your Einsteins and Niels Bohr and all these people, are borderline. They seem crazy, but you're forever trying to second guess yourself. And science doesn't come to faith-based conclusions and lock into certainty. And so what the author there, I think, is trying to do is attach to voices of science, which resonates with the general public. It's a bit like saying, don't bother looking. The experts have already done that. You don't need to think here. Just and then they smuggle in the political statement.
Yeah.
So I thought your podcast was very appropriate.
Well, it was the Innocence Project that actually wrote that one, and of course, when we watch the Innocence Files and we see people like the Chris Fabricant, you go and hammer at tongs at bite mark analysis people. It's, but I mean, as I say, it's an unquantifiable thing, isn't it? Degrees of scientific certainty, you can't measure them.
Yeah, so to me that's a non sequitur. You can't make that statement as a sort of a full stop. Yeah. But you can see how they get a lot of mileage and how widely that's used, right? So science is a big thing in the eyes of the sheeple, and so you say, well, look, if scientists, I'm not a scientist, I can't know. But you'll notice also when they use voices of science, and the mainstream media will do this quite a bit too, the referent experts or the voices of science or the voices of medicine or whatever, they have to be careful who they bring forward to make that statement, because I can find other voices in that same corral that are going to make an opposite statement. So you have to be very careful who you choose to ensure they're going to support your point. They're going to go the right way.
Yeah. No, I must admit, in a society where people are presumed innocence, the whole idea that we have this, within a certain degree of scientific certainty, it should be used to find people not guilty, not be used to convict people.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say as a
my
full stop,
big problem,
if the energy equations don't work on the burn pit, your story's dead.
Yeah.
And that would require, so find a voice of science. Could I find a voice of science that would make a counter position so I could use that in court? Absolutely. Because there's such a thing as the science industry, just like there's the medical industry, just like there's the legal industry, just like there's the political industry. A lot of these so-called experts are irretrievably tied in benefit to their environment. So would they render an opinion that is to advantage rather than truth? Some would, and those who don't, there's often hell to pay. Society will ostracize those that don't adopt the protocol, so to speak.
That's always made me laugh, that Dr. Michael West, the forensic odontologist. Advertising in the police magazines. I read about this in the book by Radley Balco and Tucker Carrington, called The Cadaver King and the Country Dentist. And they're talking about the fact that they advertise in the police journals about the fact, that their conviction rate is so high, that's so good. And as a sting operation, somebody actually sent Dr. West, a case that had these supposed bite marks, and sent as a set for him to compare his own teeth, and found the journalist guilty. Indeed, these are indeed and without doubt the teeth that cause these these marks.
Right, we'll apprehend them.
Yeah,
no, it's absolutely. I think if you lean on these, these abuse, I call the sort of abuse of the voice of science. If you lean on the argument a little bit, things fall apart, and you will invariably find many doctors quietly, or scientists or whatever, at the sidelines, other respected professionals who are being shut down so that we can latch on to the story of preference, even when it bends logic.
Anyway, I'm going to say cheerio, because I've got to be up early in the morning to take this new hound for another constitution. Thanks for joining us. As I say, I'll schedule this for a couple of hours from now, and well, thanks for coming on, and look forward to next time.
So the truthers can, by all means, give us any feedback, any thoughts, criticisms, comments. You can do your own and sort of rationale, logic. And don't forget to look on YouTube, Fleetside's Well Is That Right? And you can always feedback ideas in there to us as well.
Yeah. And the channel is under the name of Fleetside.
Yeah, so I go, that was that handle business. Yeah, my name's Mark Seeley. I'm in Ottawa here, but Fleetside is the, I like that handle,
You like the fancy colored trucks.
Yeah. So you had a nice flashy red.
That you sent me. Yeah. Did look good. Okay, I'm going to say cheerio, and we'll catch you soon.
All the best. Yeah.
Thanks again. Bye for now.